The Lion of Lehistan, Jan III Sobieski, and the Battle for Western Civilization. Dawn broke over Vienna on September 12, 1683, revealing a sight that would shake the foundations of Europe. Nearly 300,000 Ottoman troops besieged the city, their vast sea of tents stretching to the horizon. But on the wooded heights of Kallenberg, another army was gathering, led by a man the Turks called the Lion of Lehistan. Jan III Sobieski, the warrior king of Poland, sat astride his horse as 20,000 Polish heavy cavalry, the legendary winged Hussars, formed up behind him. In the next few hours, he would lead the largest cavalry charge in human history, and in doing so, change the fate of Western civilization. This is not just the story of a battle, but of an extraordinary life that seemed destined for this very moment. Sobieski was a Renaissance man in a warrior's armor, a brilliant military commander who quoted Cicero in original Latin, a passionate lover who wrote beautiful letters to his wife from the battlefield, and a leader who united quarreling European powers against overwhelming odds. When others saw inevitable defeat, he saw opportunity. When they counseled retreat, he charged forward. The Ottomans had called him the Lion of Lehistan out of fear, but they had no idea just how unstoppable he would prove to be. The rise of Jan Sobieski, scholar and warrior of the borderlands. Young Jan Sobieski first learned to ride in a land where the horizon stretched endlessly, where Tatar raiders could appear like ghosts from the rolling grasslands, and where every nobleman's son knew he might one day have to defend his home with sword in hand. The southeastern borderlands of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were no place for the faint of heart. Here, in the castle of Olesko, he was born during a thunderstorm so fierce that its lightning cracked a corner of the fortress's ancient walls, an entrance dramatic enough to suit the future king. His father James ensured the boy would be as comfortable in a library as on horseback. While other young nobles were content to learn the basics of Latin and swordsmanship, Jan devoured Thucydides and Julius Caesar in their original tongues, studying the tactics of history's great commanders, even as he learned to wield a saber. His mother, Theophila, descended from one of the Commonwealth's most powerful Ruthenian families, taught him the complex art of borderland diplomacy, where Poles, Ruthenians, Cossacks, and Tatars all vied for power. At the prestigious Nowodworsky College in Krakow, he outshone his peers not just in classical studies and rhetoric, but in the martial arts so vital to a nobleman's education, riding, fencing, and the use of the warhammer. But it was the wild steppes that truly shaped him. During long hunts with his older brother Mark, Jan learned to track prey across vast distances, to read weather and terrain, and to lead men through the trackless grasslands. These were not mere sporting adventures. The brothers often found themselves pursuing Tatar raiding parties who had taken slaves from nearby villages. More than once, young Jan returned home bloodied but triumphant, having helped free captured peasants and fight off the lightning-fast steppe raiders. The borderlands taught him lessons no books could: how to make snap decisions when lives hung in the balance, how to inspire men in desperate situations, and most importantly, how to turn chaos to his advantage. By his 18th year, Jan had grown into a powerful young man who could quote Ovid while demonstrating the perfect saber stroke. He spoke 6 languages, had studied mathematics and architecture across Europe, and could outride nearly anyone in the Commonwealth. But in 1648, the comfortable world of his youth erupted in flames. Bohdan Khmelnytsky's Cossack uprising exploded across Ukraine, and the young scholar warrior would soon learn that all his education and training had been preparing him for a destiny greater than he could have imagined. Forged in fire, the transformation of Jan Sobieski, 1648 to 1666. The Khmelnytsky uprising hit the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth like a thunderbolt. Young Sobieski got his first taste of real warfare not in the glorious pitched battles he'd read about in his classics, but in the brutal, scorched earth fighting that characterized this savage civil war. Alongside his brother Mark, he faced Cossack forces who fought with desperate fury, Tatar cavalry that seemed to appear from nowhere, and peasant insurgents who knew every forest path and marsh crossing. The elegant swordsmanship he'd learned in Krakow meant little here. This was warfare where survival depended on instinct, adaptability, and raw courage. In 1649, Sobieski found himself at the Battle of Zborov, where he witnessed both the Commonwealth's weaknesses and the remarkable military capabilities of their enemies. The Cossack-Tatar alliance demonstrated devastating effectiveness, combining Tatar mobility with Cossack firepower. Rather than dismiss their tactics as barbaric, as many Polish nobles did, Sobieski studied them intently. He began incorporating their techniques into his own fighting style, the lightning raids, the false retreats, the ability to live off the land. His men noticed that their young commander would often spend hours talking with captured Tatar warriors, learning their methods of horse breeding, their system of signals, and their ways of maintaining discipline on campaign. The death of his brother Mark in battle against the Tatars in 1652 transformed Sobieski. Gone was the bookish young nobleman who dreamed of glory. In his place emerged a hardened commander who understood the true cost of warfare. Yet even in grief, he showed his tactical genius. At the Battle of Okhmato in 1655, he turned the Tatars' own tactics against them, using a feigned retreat to lure them into a devastating ambush. The victory caught the attention of King John II Casimir, who began entrusting the young commander with increasingly important missions. By 1666, Sobieski had revolutionized the Commonwealth's cavalry tactics. He created a hybrid system that combined the shock power of the Polish winged Hussars with the mobility of Tatar light cavalry, supported by dragoons and artillery. His forces could shift seamlessly between pitched battle and guerrilla warfare, making them uniquely suited to the borderland conflicts that plagued the Commonwealth. But his greatest innovation was in logistics. He developed a system of supply that allowed his armies to move with unprecedented speed, often covering distances that his enemies considered impossible. When news came that Sobieski's army was approaching, Ottoman commanders learned to take it seriously, even when their scouts insisted there couldn't possibly be Polish forces within 100 miles. The war had forged him into something entirely new, a commander who combined Western military science with Eastern cavalry tactics, who could think like his enemies because he had taken the time to understand them, and who had learned that true leadership meant putting himself in the thick of battle alongside his men. The Turks began calling him the Lion of Lehistan, but the name wasn't just for his courage in battle. Like a lion, he had learned to be patient, to observe his prey, and to strike with overwhelming force at the perfect moment. The stage was set for his greatest challenges yet. The rise of Jan Sobieski, the Lion of Lehistan, 1666 to 1674. Sobieski's reputation soared after his stunning victory at Podhaja in 1667. The odds had been starkly against him. 20,000 Tatars and 20,000 Cossacks against his mere 3,000 men. But through brilliant maneuvering and a series of daring night attacks, he not only held off the enemy but forced them to negotiate. The victory marked him as something special, not just a skilled commander, but a military genius who could snatch victory from impossible situations. The Sejm, Polish parliament, rewarded him with the position of Grand Crown Hetman, making him commander-in-chief of all Polish forces. But it was his passionate romance with Marie Casimir de la Grange d'Arquien, Marysienka, that captured the public's imagination. Their love letters, written in a secret code and often dispatched from the midst of military campaigns, revealed a different side of the warrior. "My incomparable mistress," he wrote after one victory, "I conquered them thinking only of you." Marysienka was no passive consort. She was his political advisor, confidant, and most ardent supporter. Their marriage in 1665 had scandalized the court. She had been previously married to one of his rivals, but their obvious devotion to each other eventually won over even their harshest critics. The Ottoman Empire made its first major push against Poland in 1672, capturing the fortress of Kamieniec Podolski. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's response was paralyzed by noble politics and a weak king. Sobieski, operating largely on his own initiative and using his personal fortune to pay his troops, launched a devastating winter campaign. In the bitter cold of November, he led 3,000 Hussars and light cavalry on a lightning raid behind Ottoman lines. In just 10 days, they destroyed 20,000 Tatar cavalry, captured 30 standards, and freed thousands of Christian captives. It was a masterclass in mobile warfare, striking where the enemy least expected, using the harsh weather to his advantage, and maintaining an operational tempo that left his opponents reeling. But his greatest triumph of this period came at the Battle of Chocim in 1673. In driving snow and bitter cold, Sobieski led his forces in a daring uphill assault against Ottoman fortifications. The key to victory was timing. He struck just before dawn, when the Muslim morning prayers would cause maximum confusion in the Turkish camp. The battle ended with the Ottoman army fleeing in panic across the frozen Dniester River, which broke under their weight. The victory was so complete that when King Michael Wisniewicki died the very next day, the Sejm had only one real choice for his successor. The Lion of Lehistan would become King Jan III Sobieski, though he insisted on keeping his military command, the first Polish monarch to serve as his own hetman. The Crown and the Sword, Sobieski's reign and the defense of Europe, 1674 to 1683. Sobieski's coronation in 1674 marked the first time a Polish noble had risen to the throne through pure merit rather than birth or foreign support. The ceremony at Wawel Cathedral showed the contradiction he now embodied. Beneath the royal robes, he still wore his armor. While the crown was being placed on his head, his scouts were reporting Ottoman troop movements along the Moldavian border. Within hours of becoming king, he was already planning his next campaign. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth he inherited was a paradox, a state with one of Europe's most formidable armies, but paralyzed by the Liberum veto, which allowed a single noble to block any legislation. Sobieski found himself fighting battles in the Sejm that were as complex as any military campaign. His vision of a strong, centralized state that could effectively resist Ottoman expansion faced fierce opposition from nobles who feared losing their privileges. Even his marriage to a French woman was used against him, with opponents claiming he was more interested in Versailles than Warsaw. But it was his military genius that truly transformed the office of king. Breaking with tradition, he established a network of fast-moving postal riders that kept him informed of developments across the massive Commonwealth. He reformed the army's supply system, created Poland's first engineering corps, and modernized the artillery. Most controversially, he began recruiting peasant infantry units, equipped and trained in Western European style, as a counterbalance to the noble-dominated cavalry. The Ottoman Empire, watching these reforms with growing concern, decided to strike before Sobieski could fully strengthen his position. In 1675, a massive Turkish Tatar army invaded Ukraine. Sobieski met them at Lwów with forces that looked dramatically different from traditional Polish armies. Along with the famous winged Hussars, he now deployed musket-armed infantry in mobile fortified squares, supported by light field artillery that could keep pace with the cavalry. The resulting victory was so decisive that Sultan Mehmed IV personally wrote to him, trying to negotiate a separate peace. But by 1683, everything had changed. The Ottoman Empire, under the ambitious Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, was preparing its largest invasion force ever, not aimed at Poland this time, but at the heart of the Habsburg Empire, Vienna. Emperor Leopold Berlin, who had long dismissed Sobieski's warnings about Ottoman ambitions, now desperately sought his help. The Polish king faced an agonizing decision. The Habsburgs had been poor allies, often undermining Polish interests. Many of his advisors urged him to let Vienna fall, arguing that a weakened Austria would benefit Poland. But Sobieski saw what others didn't. If Vienna fell, nothing could stop the Ottoman advance into Central Europe. On July 14, 1683, he made his decision. The Lion of Lehistan would march to Vienna, but this time not just as a military commander. He would lead the largest coalition of Christian forces since the Crusades. The race to save Vienna, summer 1683. The march to Vienna became a desperate race against time. Kara Mustafa's army had already surrounded the city by July 14th, and the Viennese garrison under Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg could not hold out indefinitely. The Ottoman sappers were methodically undermining Vienna's walls, while disease and starvation stalked its streets. But moving a relief army of this size, nearly 80,000 men, across difficult terrain required a logistical miracle. Sobieski drove his forces at a punishing pace, knowing that every day could mean the difference between saving Vienna and finding its burned ruins. The coalition he led was unprecedented. Polish Hussars, German infantry, Austrian cavalry, and Hungarian scouts, all speaking different languages and following different tactical doctrines. Yet Sobieski managed them masterfully, keeping the army unified through sheer force of personality. He slept in the same conditions as his men, shared their hardships, and was often seen personally scouting ahead with advance units. When crossing the Danube proved challenging, he stripped to his shirt and worked alongside the engineers constructing the pontoon bridges. But the greatest challenges were political. The Duke of Lorraine, commanding the imperial forces, technically had seniority over Sobieski. The German princes resented taking orders from a Polish king. Behind the scenes, Louis XIV of France was actively working to sabotage the relief effort, sending secret messages to his allies urging them to delay. Sobieski cut through these intrigues with characteristic directness. He simply kept moving his army forward, forcing others to either follow or be left behind. By early September, Ottoman deserters brought terrifying news. The Turks had nearly broken through Vienna's walls. The city was surviving on rats and leather, and ammunition was critically low. Starhemberg was sending desperate signals by rocket every night, pleading for help. The Allied army still had to cross the Vienna woods' difficult terrain where the Ottomans could easily ambush them. Military convention dictated a careful advance with secured supply lines. Instead, Sobieski announced they would cross the entire forest in a single night march. His generals protested that it was impossible. He responded by personally leading the vanguard into the darkness. The night march of September 11th, 12 was a masterpiece of coordination. Using a system of drum signals and torchbearers, Sobieski kept his massive army moving through the darkness. The Ottomans, convinced no major force could traverse the Vienna woods so quickly, had left the routes largely unguarded. As dawn broke on September 12th, Kara Mustafa looked up at the Kahlenberg Heights to see an impossible sight: the largest Christian army assembled in a century, deployed and ready for battle. The Lion of Lehistan had arrived, and with him 20,000 of the finest heavy cavalry ever assembled. The stage was set for one of history's most decisive battles. The Day of Wings, the Battle of Vienna, 1683. At dawn on September 12th, Sobieski began the battle with a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He ordered his army to light thousands of fires across the Kahlenberg Heights, creating a wall of light that caught the morning mist. To the Ottoman army below, it appeared as if the heavens themselves were on fire. The king then ordered the entire Christian army, Germans, Austrians, Poles, and Saxons, to kneel for mass. The sound of 80,000 men praying echoed across the valley, carried by the morning air into the Ottoman camps. The battle opened with an assault by German and Austrian infantry against the Ottoman trenches on the slopes below the Kahlenberg. The fighting was brutal, with the Germans pushing forward step by bloody step. Kara Mustafa, still believing this was the main attack, committed his janissaries to hold the line. It was exactly what Sobieski had planned. While the Ottoman commander focused on the center, Polish infantry quietly moved through the Dornbach Valley, turning the Ottoman left flank. By mid-afternoon, the battle had reached a critical point. The German infantry had taken heavy casualties but had pulled the Ottoman forces out of position. Sobieski had positioned his cavalry, including his feared Hussars, in a hidden valley behind the Kahlenberg. As the sun began to dip, he gave the signal. The largest cavalry charge in military history began with an eerie silence, the Hussars' famous wings creating a terrifying whistling sound as they picked up speed. What happened next became legend. 20,000 cavalry, with the Polish Hussars in the lead, struck the Ottoman lines with the force of an avalanche. The psychological impact of the charge was overwhelming. The sight of thousands of winged riders emerging from the setting sun, lances leveled, caused panic in the Ottoman ranks. Kara Mustafa attempted to rally his forces, but the momentum of the charge was unstoppable. The Ottoman lines shattered. The rout became a massacre. The Ottoman retreat turned into a panic-stricken flight, abandoning their entire camp, including the Grand Vizier's personal tent with its luxurious furnishings and massive war chest. Sobieski's forces pursued the fleeing army through the night, capturing the Ottoman artillery park and supply train. The next morning, Sobieski entered Vienna in triumph. In a gesture that captured European imagination, he personally helped clear the barricades from St. Stephen's Cathedral, where he attended a Te Deum Mass of thanksgiving. In a letter to Pope Innocent II, Sobieski adapted Julius Caesar's famous words, "Veni, vidi, Deus vicit." I came, I saw, God conquered. The relief of Vienna had cost him nearly a quarter of his hussars, but the victory was complete. In the abandoned Ottoman camp, his men found something that would change European culture: hundreds of bags of strange brown beans. Coffee had arrived in Central Europe, and the first Viennese coffee house would soon open using these captured supplies. It was perhaps fitting that the site of one of history's most decisive battles would also give birth to one of Europe's most enduring social institutions. The aftermath and legacy of Jan III Sobieski's triumph. The victory at Vienna proved to be just the beginning. Sobieski pursued the retreating Ottoman army with relentless energy, catching them at Parkani, where he inflicted another crushing defeat. The Ottoman retreat turned into a wholesale collapse of their European ambitions. By year's end, Hungary, long under Turkish control, was largely liberated. But the true impact of Vienna would take decades to fully unfold. For the king himself, victory came with a bitter aftertaste. The Habsburgs, quickly forgetting their debt to him, began working to undermine Polish influence in the region. Emperor Leopold, who had fled Vienna during the siege, proved particularly ungrateful. He refused to even greet Sobieski in person after the battle, citing arcane points of protocol. The Papal States, Venice, and the German princes showered the Polish king with honors, but offered little concrete support for his vision of a grand anti-Ottoman alliance. In Poland, Sobieski's final years were marked by increasing frustration. His attempts to establish a hereditary monarchy failed in the face of noble opposition. The Commonwealth's fundamental problems, the paralysis of the liberum veto, the power of regional magnates, the weakness of central authority, remained unsolved. Even his military reforms began to unravel as the immediate Ottoman threat receded. He watched with growing concern as Russia's power grew to the east, while his own nation's political system remained gridlocked. Yet Sobieski's personal legacy proved extraordinary. His love letters to Marysienka, written throughout his campaigns, became celebrated as masterpieces of Polish literature. His military innovations influenced commanders for generations. Even Napoleon studied his tactics, particularly his use of combined arms and rapid maneuver. The palace he built at Wilano became a masterpiece of Baroque architecture, reflecting his vision of Poland as a bridge between East and West. Here, Ottoman spoils of war sat alongside Italian paintings and French tapestries, creating a unique synthesis of European and Oriental styles. In his final years, plagued by gout and heart problems, Sobieski continued to serve as his own military commander, though each campaign became increasingly difficult. His last major victory came at Suceava in 1691, where he defeated the Tartars one final time. When he died in 1696, his passing marked the end of an era. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth would never again achieve such heights of military glory or international prestige. Within a century, it would cease to exist as an independent state. But Sobieski's greatest achievement outlived both him and his nation. His victory at Vienna marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's long retreat from Europe. The Turkish menace that had haunted European dreams for centuries was broken forever. Cities across Central Europe still bear monuments to the savior of Western civilization, though few modern visitors recognize his name. Perhaps his most fitting memorial lies in Vienna itself, in the coffee houses he inadvertently helped create, where for centuries people have gathered to discuss art, politics, and the great flows of history that one man, through sheer force of will, managed to redirect. The legacy of Jan III Sobieski, the last Crusader. In the end, Jan III Sobieski left behind a paradox. The man who saved Vienna died feeling his life's work was incomplete. The grandiose tomb he commissioned for himself in Wawel Cathedral stood empty for years after his death, as noble infighting delayed even his funeral arrangements. His sons, despite his careful education and preparation, never achieved the crown he had hoped would become hereditary in his line. Within decades of his death, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth began its long decline, eventually vanishing from the map entirely in the partitions of the late 18th century. Yet his impact rippled through centuries in unexpected ways. The military revolution he sparked transformed warfare. His innovations in combining heavy cavalry, infantry and artillery into coordinated shock groups influenced military thinking well into the modern era. The coffeehouse culture born from his victory at Vienna spread across Europe, creating new spaces for intellectual and political discourse that would help birth the Enlightenment. His personal library, one of the largest in Europe, contained manuscripts that would prove crucial to later historians' understanding of Eastern European and Ottoman history. Even his love story with Marysienka entered Polish Romantic tradition. Their coded letters, finally deciphered in the 19th century, revealed a partnership of equals rare for its time. His memory took on different meanings in different eras. For 19th century Polish nationalists, he represented a lost golden age of Polish power and independence. For Cold War politicians, he became a symbol of resistance to Eastern tyranny. Modern historians see him differently, as a pragmatic commander who respected and learned from his enemies, a Renaissance humanist who happened to be a brilliant general, and perhaps the last ruler who could unite Europe, however briefly, in a common cause. Today, the winged Hussars he led are more likely to appear in video games than history books, and few outside Poland know his name. But his legacy endures in subtle ways, in the cavalry tactics still taught at military academies, in the blend of East and West that characterizes Central European culture, and in the centuries of peace his victory helped secure for Central Europe. Jan III Sobieski, the warrior king who could quote Latin poetry in the heat of battle, the devoted husband who wrote love letters from siege lines, the commander who thought his enemies and outfought them too, remains unique in history. The last Crusader who was also a Renaissance man, the final flowering of an age when one person's decisions could still change the course of civilization.